The bouquet hit the floor first. Emily Carter's fingers went slack before the rest of her body caught up with what was happening, and the cascade of white roses and baby's breath tumbled down the steps of the altar in slow motion, petals scattering across the ivory runner like snow that had given up trying. The whole church seemed to inhale at once, 230 guests sucking air between their teeth simultaneously, and then there was nothing. No music, no whispers, no shuffling of programs or clearing of throats. Just the sound of James Whitmore's voice still hanging in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. I can't do this. I'm sorry. Look at her. She's too thick. I can't spend the rest of my life with someone who looks like that. He had said it clearly. He hadn't whispered it to the officiant or muttered it under his breath. He had turned to face the congregation, his boutonniere slightly crooked, his jaw set, and he had said it loud enough for the women in the very back row to hear. The ones who had already been crying happy tears and now sat with their tissues frozen against their cheeks, unable to process the switch from joy to devastation. Emily stood at the top of the aisle. She hadn't even made it all the way to him. She was 6 steps from the altar when he'd held up his hand, and she had stopped the way you stop when you see a car coming. Instinctively, completely, the muscles making the decision before the brain could argue. James, the officiant said carefully, a man named Pastor Brown who had been performing weddings for 31 years and had never once experienced a moment like this one. His voice came out thin and uncertain. Perhaps we should. No. James smoothed the front of his jacket. No, I made my decision. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I can't. I'm not attracted to her. I thought I could get past it, but I can't. Emily's maid of honor, her best friend Carla, made a sound somewhere behind her that was halfway between a gasp and a growl. Emily heard it distantly, the way you hear sounds when you're underwater. Everything had taken on that quality, muffled, slowed, like the air itself had thickened around her. She looked down at her dress. It was the dress she had spent 4 months finding. It was ivory, with lace sleeves and a sweetheart neckline and a long train that Carla had spent 45 minutes steaming that very morning. The woman at the boutique had told her she looked like a painting. Emily had cried in the fitting room. Good tears, rare tears, the kind that came from feeling just briefly beautiful. Now she stood in that dress in front of 230 people and felt every single one of their eyes moving over her body the way James's words had suggested they should. Cataloging, measuring, agreeing or disagreeing with his assessment. And it didn't matter which side they fell on, because the damage wasn't in their opinions. The damage was in the fact that her body, her actual physical body, had just been put on trial in the middle of a church on a Saturday afternoon, and the verdict had been delivered before she'd even had a chance to speak. She had known something was wrong. She had known it the way women sometimes know things, not with evidence, not with anything she could have pointed to, but with a low-grade hum of anxiety that had lived in her chest for the past 3 weeks like a frequency she couldn't tune out. James had been distant. He'd been distracted. He'd started making small comments, nothing devastating on their own, just little observations. You've been eating a lot lately. We should probably start going to the gym together. Have you considered that dress in a different style? She had told herself it was stress, pre-wedding jitters. She had told Carla, and Carla had nodded and said men got weird before weddings. It was normal, it didn't mean anything. She had told herself that when he saw her walk down the aisle, he would remember why he loved her, and everything would reset, and the hum would go quiet. The hum had not gone quiet. It had just been waiting to be proven right. Emily. Her mother's voice came from the front pew. Sweetheart, come sit down. She's fine, James said dismissively, as though her mother had been speaking to him. She'll be fine. I'm the one doing the right thing here. Would it have been better to wait until after? To put us both through years of... James! That was her father, David Carter, a quiet man who raised his voice perhaps 3 times a year, and this was apparently going to be one of those times. He rose from the pew, all 6 feet of him, and his voice came out low and steady. That is enough. James looked at him with something approaching surprise, as though he'd expected the room to thank him for his honesty. When David Carter took a step forward, James seemed to recalculate. He straightened his jacket one more time, glanced briefly at Emily. Not with regret, she noticed, just with a mildly uncomfortable look of a man who had decided a meeting was over. And then he turned and walked back up the aisle toward the doors. People moved out of his way. That was perhaps the most surreal part, the automatic, instinctive parting of the crowd as he walked through, like they were still deferring to him, even now. He walked through the tall wooden doors of St. Andrew's Church without looking back, and they swung shut behind him with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. And then Emily became aware that she was still standing there. She became aware of her own breathing, which had gone shallow and fast. She became aware of the lace on her sleeves, which was suddenly itching. She became aware of her bouquet on the floor, and she simply could not, make herself bend down to pick it up. She became aware of Carla moving toward her, and her mother rising from the pew, and Pastor Brown clearing his throat, and the collective rustle of 230 people who desperately wanted to look away, but couldn't. She was going to cry. She knew it the way you know rain is coming. Not yet, but soon and hard. She pressed her lips together and lifted her chin instead, not because she felt strong, but because some stubborn, ancient part of her refused to give this moment the full satisfaction of watching her crumble in front of witnesses. She would crumble later. She would crumble in a bathroom or a car or a bedroom with the curtains drawn, but she would not do it here, not on this runner, not in this dress, not with 230 people watching and deciding whether to feel sorry for her or whether James had, on some level they'd never admit out loud, had a point. Emily, Carla reached for her arm, and that was when the voice came from the back of the room. It was not loud. That was the first thing that registered. Not the words, but the quality of the voice, which was deep and unhurried and carried the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need volume to be heard. The kind of voice that rooms simply respond to, the way flowers respond to light. If he won't marry her, the voice said, then I will. Every head in St. Andrew's Church turned. The man standing at the back of the room was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and the kind of composed, still posture that suggested he had never once in his life been in a hurry. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly cost more than most of the guest cars, with a white pocket square folded with mathematical precision and dark shoes that reflected the light from the stained glass windows. He was perhaps 40, maybe a little less, with a strong jaw and dark eyes that were fixed, with complete calm, on Emily. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Emily stared at him. Who are you? She said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. The man walked forward. He moved through the crowd the way James had, people parting for him automatically, but the energy was entirely different. James had cleared the room with the blunt force of social embarrassment. This man cleared it with something else entirely, something that made the air shift. He stopped at the foot of the aisle and looked at her. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a very dark brown, nearly black, and they were calm in a way that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. Or maybe it was a little. She wasn't sure yet. My name is Dominic Russo, he said. He said it like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world. Somewhere in the middle pews, a woman whispered the name to her husband. The husband went very still. I don't know you, Emily said. No, he agreed. You don't. Then why would you? She stopped. She looked around at the church, at Carla's stunned face, at her father still standing in the aisle, at Pastor Brown gripping his Bible like a flotation device, at 230 faces in various stages of bewilderment. She looked back at this stranger. This is not how this works. I know, he said. I also know that you've been standing in this church for the past 4 minutes carrying a humiliation that isn't yours to carry, and that the man who put it on you just walked out without a second thought. He paused. I've been in enough moments in my life to know which ones matter. This one does. You don't know me, she said again. It was less of an argument this time and more of a genuine bewilderment, a reaching for solid ground. Not yet, Dominic said, and the corner of his mouth moved slightly. But I'm suggesting we change that. The church was so quiet that Emily could hear the candles flickering. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the doors where James had disappeared. She looked at her bouquet, still on the floor, petals scattered across the ivory runner. Then she looked back at Dominic Russo, this stranger in the charcoal suit, and she did the only thing she could think to do. Can we go somewhere and talk? She said. He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he already knew. Of course. He offered her his arm. She looked at it for a beat. Then, because the alternative was to keep standing at this altar alone in front of everyone she knew, she took it. The murmur that went through the congregation as they walked back up the aisle together was enormous. But Emily kept her eyes forward, her hand light on Dominic's arm, her chin at the angle she had decided on when she thought she was going to cry, and then decided she wasn't. Not yet. Not here. The doors of St. Andrew's Church opened onto the afternoon light, and for just a moment, stepping out of the shadow of the nave into the sun, Emily Carter felt something she couldn't name. She would figure out what it was later. For now, she just kept walking. If you're new here, welcome, darling. We are so glad love brought you to us today. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and join our beautiful community, because this story is just getting started and you do not want to miss a single heartbeat of it. And to those of you who have already subscribed and keep coming back, oh, you beautiful souls, welcome back home. Your loyalty means everything. And as always, we save the best seat just for you. Now settle in, because what's coming next is going to steal your heart completely. And while you're here, drop a comment below and tell us, what did you think of that opening? Did James make your blood boil? Did Dominic walking forward give you chills? Let us know. We are reading every single word you write, and we love hearing from you. Behind them, the church erupted. The courtyard behind St. Andrew's was a small, quiet garden that the church used for outdoor ceremonies in summer. There was a stone bench beneath a magnolia tree, and a fountain that had been turned off for winter, and the distant sound of traffic from the street beyond the iron gate. It was an ordinary space that felt, just now, completely surreal, the way everything felt surreal when your life has just taken a 90-degree turn without consulting you first. Emily sat on the stone bench. Dominic stood a few feet away, giving her space she hadn't asked for but found she needed. The afternoon light came through the magnolia branches in pieces, and somewhere in the building behind them, she could hear the muffled chaos of 230 people figuring out what to do with themselves. She pressed her hands flat on the front of her gown and breathed. "You can ask," Dominic said. "Whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking a lot of things," she said. "I imagine. The first thing I'm thinking," Emily said carefully, "is that strangers don't do what you just did in there. Normal people don't walk into someone's wedding and announce they'll step in for the groom." She looked up at him. "So either you're not normal, or there's something you're not telling me, or both." "Both," he said, without hesitation. She appreciated that. She didn't know why, but she did. After 4 years with a man who had turned dishonesty into an art form, dishonesty through omission, through misdirection, through the kind of carefully worded half-truths that are technically accurate, but fundamentally false, there was something clarifying about a person who just said both. "Who are you?" she asked. "And I mean actually, not your name. Who are you?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fountain, at the iron gate, and then back at her. "I'm a man who has spent a significant portion of his life operating outside the boundaries of what most people would consider legitimate," he said. "I run businesses that aren't always above board. I have associates who aren't always safe to know. I have a reputation in certain circles that I suspect some of your wedding guests are probably whispering about right now. The Mafia," Emily said flatly. He tilted his head slightly. "That word covers a lot of territory. Are you in a mafia?" A pause. "I'm affiliated with an organization that people tend to describe that way, yes." Emily stared at him. "And you thought the appropriate response to a woman being abandoned at the altar was to introduce yourself by offering to marry her." "I thought the appropriate response to watching a woman be publicly humiliated by a man who didn't deserve her was to make sure she didn't have to stand there alone," he said. "The marriage part was—" He paused, and something in his expression shifted slightly, perhaps more impulsive than I typically allow myself to be. "Impulsive," she repeated. "A mafia boss acting impulsively. It happens." She almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and a breath, surprised out of her. She pressed her fingers to her mouth immediately, embarrassed by it, but Dominic's expression didn't change in a way that made her feel mocked. He simply watched her, steady and patient, and waited. "Why were you even there?" she asked. "At my wedding. You said you don't know me." "I don't," he said. "I know your father. Slightly. We've crossed paths in business, legitimate business, before you ask, commercial real estate, a handful of times over the years. He mentioned the wedding in passing. I had business nearby, and I thought He stopped. I don't typically attend events of this kind. But I was close, and I found myself going in, and I don't entirely know why. I've been asking myself that since I walked through the doors. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You found yourself going in, she said. Yes. To a stranger's wedding. Yes. And then found yourself offering to marry that stranger. I'm aware of how it sounds. Do you know how it sounds? Unhinged, he said. Probably alarming. Certainly unprecedented in my personal history. She searched his face. There was no performance in it. No charm offensive. No calculated smile. He looked like a man who had done something that had surprised him as much as anyone and was now simply standing in front of the consequences, prepared to deal with them. I'm not going to marry you, she said. I want to be clear about that. I don't know you, and I'm not going to marry you, and if this is some kind of, power move or some way of collecting a debt from my father or... It's not, he said. Your father owes me nothing. This has nothing to do with him. Then what does it have to do with? Dominic was quiet for a moment. The magnolia branches moved overhead in a light wind. I watched that man say what he said to you, he said. And the room went quiet, and everyone looked at you the way people look at something they don't know how to react to, and you just stood there and didn't fall apart. He paused. That was remarkable. Emily felt something tighten in her throat. I'm going to fall apart, she said. I just haven't yet. I know, he said. But the fact that you haven't yet, in front of all those people, after what he said, that's not nothing. She looked down at her dress, at the lace on her sleeves, which had stopped itching now that she was out of the church, at the train pooling around the bench like spilled water. He said I was too thick, she said. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of that. He said it out loud, in front of everyone. Yes. Do you know what that's like? She looked up. To have someone who was supposed to love you, use your body as the reason they're leaving, and to do it in front of 200 people, so that every single person in that room has to sit there and look at your body and decide if he's right. No, Dominic said. I don't know what that's like. I won't pretend to. Then what was that in there? Why does it matter to you? He held her gaze. Because he was wrong, he said. It came out simply, without decoration. And I've spent enough of my life around men who make women feel like they're defined by how useful they are to look at. It makes me tired. It made me angry watching it happen to you. So I stepped forward. He paused. I realized it wasn't my place. No, she agreed. It wasn't. Do you want me to go? She should have said yes. The logical answer, the safe answer, the answer that protected her from adding any more chaos to the spectacular disaster this day had already become, was yes. She should have said yes and gone back inside and cried in the bridal suite and let Carla bring her champagne and talk about what a bullet she dodged. And tomorrow she would start the process of unraveling the wedding they'd spent 14 months planning. And she would be fine, eventually, the way people are always eventually fine. No, she said instead. Dominic nodded slowly. I want to know more about who you are, she said. Not because I'm agreeing to anything. Not because I'm not doing anything today. I can't make a single decision today. I barely trust myself to stand up right now. She met his eyes. But I want to know who you are before I send you away. Because I've been making decisions based on incomplete information for a very long time, and look where it got me. That's fair, he said. It is, she agreed. So, who are you? Pass the abbreviated version. Give me the real one. He sat down on the far end of the bench, at a distance that felt deliberate, respectful, and he was quiet for a moment, looking at the fountain. When he started talking, his voice was measured and even, the way it probably always was, and Emily found herself watching his hands, still folded loosely, and thinking that she had never seen a person take up space so completely without seeming to try. My father came to this country with $40 and a last name that opened the wrong kinds of doors, Dominic said. He made choices early on that determined the shape of my life before I was old enough to choose for myself. By the time I understood what I'd been born into, I was already part of it. The question was never whether to be in it. The question was what kind of man to be inside it. He paused. I've tried to be one who doesn't hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. I'm not always succeeded, but I try. And the legitimate business Emily said. Real estate, primarily. Some investment. I've spent the last decade building the kind of infrastructure that means my children, if I have them, won't have to be born into anything they didn't choose. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to approve of my history. I'm just telling you who I am. Emily absorbed this. The sound of the traffic beyond the gate. The wind in the magnolia. The distant murmur of the church, where she supposed eventually someone was going to come and find her. Your history is complicated, she said. Yes. Mine just got a lot more complicated too, she said. The corner of his mouth moved again. So, it has. She was quiet for a moment. Then what happens now? Practically, what does a person do when they've just been left at the altar in front of everyone they know? Whatever they want, Dominic said. It's your day. You can go back in and tell your guests thank you for coming and that the reception dinner is still being served because you've already paid for it. You can go home and not speak to anyone for 3 days. You can get very dramatically drunk in a beautiful dress, which I would consider entirely justified. He held her gaze. You don't have to decide anything today, least of all about me. But you want to see me again, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I do, he said. Yes. Carla appeared at the garden door, her red maid of honor dress like a flare against the old stone. She stopped when she saw Dominic, and Emily watched her best friend cycle through approximately 7 emotions in the space of 3 seconds before settling on something that was equal parts protective and deeply, desperately curious. Carla said, people are asking. The caterer wants to know if... She glanced at Dominic again. Sorry, I don't know who you are. Dominic Russo, he said, rising from the bench. He said it the same way he'd said it inside, like an ordinary fact. Carla's eyes went wide. She looked at Emily. Emily gave her a look that said, I will explain everything later. Please don't make this a scene. Carla, to her eternal credit, gave a short nod. Okay, she said. Whenever you're ready. Tell them dinner is being served, Emily said. Tell them I'll be in shortly. Carla nodded and disappeared back through the door. Emily stood, and her train settled around her feet. She looked at Dominic, who had remained standing since Carla appeared, and she thought, this is the strangest day of my life. This is the worst day of my life. And somehow, in this garden, in the last 10 minutes, it has also been the most honest conversation I've had in years. Thank you, she said, for stepping forward, even if it was impulsive, even if it was unprecedented. She picked up the corners of her train. I don't want you to think I'm ungrateful. I don't think that, he said. Can I ask you one more thing before I go back in? Yes. When you said you'd marry me, she said, watching him carefully, did you mean it? Dominic held her gaze. I don't say things I don't mean, he said. Emily nodded once. Then she walked back toward the church door, and Dominic Russo stood in the garden under the magnolia tree and watched her go, and the afternoon light moved over everything the same way it always had, as if nothing had changed at all. Everything had changed. The reception dinner happened. That was the only way Emily would later describe it to people. It happened the way weather happens, or traffic, or the specific kind of headache that comes from trying to hold yourself together through something your body and mind both understand to be catastrophic. She sat at the head table without a groom beside her, and Carla slid into that seat and poured 2 glasses of wine without commenting on it. And Emily's father made a toast that was so carefully worded and full of quiet dignity that half the room cried and the other half looked at their plates, and the salmon was served with roasted asparagus and fingerling potatoes. Because 14 months of planning doesn't just evaporate because the groom does. She shook hands. She accepted hugs. She smiled at appropriate intervals and said, I'll be fine, really, so many times that the phrase stopped meaning anything. Aunt Rosemary from Cincinnati told her that everything happens for a reason, and Emily nodded and thought, I don't believe that, but I appreciate that you do. James's mother, a brittle woman named Patricia, who had always looked at Emily the way you look at a piece of furniture that doesn't quite fit the room, had the grace to leave before the soup course, which Emily counted as a mercy. Carla did not leave her side for 4 hours. It was after midnight when Emily finally sat on the edge of her hotel bed. The honeymoon suite, because of course it was, because no one had thought to cancel it, still in a dress, shoes on the floor beside her feet, the last of her updo falling loose around her shoulders. The room was enormous and white and full of rose petals that someone had scattered across the duvet, which was possibly the most devastating detail of the entire evening. She looked at the rose petals for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and looked at James's last text message, sent at 11:47 p.m. I know you're angry. I just think in the long run this is better for both of us. I hope you can understand. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on a nightstand and lay back on the duvet, rose petals and all, and stared at the ceiling. And finally, she cried. Not the neat, controlled tears of shock, but the ugly, full-body kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and structural, from a place that has been taking quiet damage for a long time, and has finally, in the permission of private darkness, decided to release it all at once. She cried for 20 minutes. Maybe more. She cried for the dress, and the 14 months of planning, and the centerpieces, and the venue deposit, and the salmon with asparagus. She cried for the 4 years she'd spent with James, the version of those 4 years she believed in. The private jokes, and the Sunday mornings, and the apartment they'd chosen together with the kitchen that got afternoon light. She cried for the version of herself who had believed those things were real. And she cried, though she hated herself a little for it, for the specific, precise humiliation of having her body called out by name in front of everyone she knew, as though her body were the main character and she was just the vehicle it moved around in. When she was done, she felt scraped out and hollow, but also faintly like something had been cleaned. She sat up. She looked at the rose petals. She thought about Dominic Russo standing in the garden under the magnolia tree, perfectly still, saying, I don't say things I don't mean. She didn't know what to do with him. She didn't know what to do with any of it. But she had been given, without asking for it, a strange and undeniable fact that a man she had never met had thought her worthy of stepping forward for. That whatever his reasons, whatever his history, whatever the complicated territory behind his name and his suit and his quiet authority, he had seen her standing there, and he had moved. She lay back on the pillow and closed her eyes and let that small, strange fact sit in the room with her until she fell asleep. 3 days later, Dominic called. She almost didn't answer. She stared at the unknown number on her screen for 4 full rings, and then picked up because not picking up felt like a decision she'd regret. It's Dominic, he said. I got your number from your father. I hope that's all right. You asked my father for my number, she said. Yes. And he gave it to you. He did. A pause. I think he respects honesty. My father knows who you are, Emily said. What you are. And he gave you my number, he said, and I'm quoting directly. She's smarter than everyone in that room combined, and she can make her own decisions. Another pause. I thought that was worth telling you. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter of her apartment. She had moved back 3 days ago, after one night in the honeymoon suite and 2 nights at Carla's, and looked out the window at the gray February sky. I've been thinking about what you said, she said. In the garden? Which part? That you don't say things you don't mean. I don't. I want to test that, she said. I want to have dinner with you, and I want to ask you things, and I want you to answer them honestly. No diplomacy. No managing of information. If I ask you something, I want the true answer, even if the true answer is uncomfortable. Dominic was quiet for a moment. I can do that, he said, with one caveat. There are things related to my business that I can't share for reasons that protect other people. If you ask me something that falls in that category, I'll tell you it's in that category rather than lying to you. I won't use it as a cover for ordinary discomfort. Fair, Emily said. When are you free? I'm a project manager. My calendar is controlled by me. When are you free? Tonight, he said. She paused. Tonight is fast. Yes. Does that mean you want to see me, or that you're testing whether I'll say yes quickly? A beat. It means I've been thinking about this conversation for 3 days, and I see no reason to wait an additional one. Emily pressed her lips together against something that wasn't quite a smile. 8 o'clock, she said. You pick the place. Somewhere quiet. I don't want to run into anyone I know. I know a place, he said. I'm sure you do. The restaurant was small and Italian, and on a street Emily had never been down before, tucked between a dry cleaner and a wine merchant, with no signage outside, except a small brass number above the door. Inside, it was warm and low-lit, with maybe 12 tables and the kind of background noise that meant you could talk without being overheard. The maitre d' greeted Dominic by name and led them to a corner table without being asked. "You come here often," Emily said, once they were seated. "I own it," Dominic said. She looked around, the dark wood, the small candles, the art on the walls. "Of course you do," she said. He almost smiled. It was a failing restaurant 7 years ago. The owner was a man named Enzo who could cook better than anyone I'd ever met, but had no idea how to run a business. I bought in as a silent partner, restructured the finances, and left him alone to cook. He's been fully solvent for 5 years. "That's almost a wholesome story," Emily said. "Almost," he agreed. She looked at him across the table. He was dressed differently tonight, still impeccable, but less formal. Dark shirt, no tie. She noticed, in this light, that there was a faint scar along his jawline, and that his hands, which she'd already cataloged as perpetually still, had the kind of texture that came from a life that had not always been conducted in quiet restaurants and charcoal suits. "I have questions," she said, starting from the beginning. "Go ahead. Have you ever been married?" "No." "Engaged?" "No." "Close?" He considered this. "Once approximately. 15 years ago. It ended before it became anything formal. She decided, reasonably, that she didn't want the life that came with me." "Do you think she was right?" "I think she was making a rational decision based on accurate information," he said. "Whether she was right depends on how you weigh things. I can't weigh for someone else." Emily nodded. "Do you have children?" "No." "Do you want them?" "Yes," he said. "I do. I've built enough of a different kind of life that I think I could offer a child something better than what I had." "What did you have?" "A father who was brilliant and dangerous and largely absent," Dominic said. "A mother who loved me very much and was afraid most of the time. Money, which helped with practical things and did nothing for the rest." He met her eyes. "I don't want to reproduce that." Emily picked up her wine glass, held it without drinking. "Why me?" she said. "I know you gave me the garden version. I want the real version." Dominic was still for a moment. "I've been in rooms full of people my entire life," he said. "It's the nature of my work. You manage people, you read people, you're always in a room making calculations. After a while, most people become legible to me very quickly. I can tell within minutes what someone wants, what they're afraid of, how they'll behave under pressure. And me? You were different," he said. "When that man said what he said, and the room went quiet, I watched you. I've watched people receive devastating news in high-stakes situations. Professionals, trained people, and very few of them do what you did. You just stood there, not frozen, not performing. You just held it visibly, completely, while it hit you, and you didn't let it take you down. That's not a nothing quality. That's the kind of thing that doesn't break." Emily was quiet. The candle between them flickered. "Also thought you were beautiful," he said. "I want to be clear about that, because I suspect people in your life have made you feel that your appearance is something to be worked around or overcome rather than something that simply is what it is. I'm not interested in performing indifference to how you look in order to seem enlightened. I found you striking from the moment you walked in, and that's the truth." The words sat in the air between them. Emily had been braced. She realized this now, had been physically bracing for some variation of "it's what's inside that counts" or "beauty comes in all forms." The well-meaning script that kind people recite, and that always manages, somehow, to reinforce the very thing it's trying to dismantle. She had not been braced for just, "I found you striking." That's the truth. She didn't know what to do with it. She looked at her wine. "You're very direct," she said finally. "You asked for honesty," he said. "I did," she agreed. "Keep going." They talked for 3 hours. The kitchen sent out courses that Emily hadn't ordered, small, extraordinary things that Enzo apparently sent out for Dominic as a matter of course. And they ate and talked, and the restaurant slowly emptied around them until they were the only ones left, and still they talked. She told him about her work, project management for an architectural firm, buildings that went up over years and required the simultaneous coordination of hundreds of moving pieces, which she was, she said, genuinely good at. He listened the way she would later realize he always listened, completely, without dividing his attention, without waiting for his turn to speak. She told him about her family. Her father, the quiet stalwart, Her mother who worried loudly about everything, but somehow always arrived at the right conclusion. Her younger brother Marcus, who was currently backpacking through Southeast Asia and had sent exactly one text about the wedding that said, "Tell me James is not breathing right now." Dominic listened to all of it. She did not tell him about the specific weight of James's words. Not yet. Not the way they were still sitting in her chest, turning over and over like something that hadn't settled. She would tell him later. Tonight she was still in the early stages of deciding whether to trust him, which meant she was allowed to keep some things back. When they finally left, he walked her to the car she'd called, and he stood on the pavement in the cold February night with his hands in his pockets. And he said, "I'd like to do this again." "I know," she said. "Is that a yes?" She pulled her coat around her and looked at him. "It's a probably," she said, "which, for me right now, is worth more than a yes." He nodded. "Then I'll take it." She got in the car. She watched him in the rearview mirror, still standing on the pavement as the car pulled away, and he did not move until the car turned the corner. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and thought, "What are you doing, Emily?" She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know. But for the first time in 3 days, the thing in her chest that had been grinding and heavy felt just fractionally lighter, and she decided, at least for tonight, to let that be enough. They had dinner again the following week and the week after that. The third time, Emily suggested lunch instead, because dinner felt weighted with a significance she wasn't sure she'd earned yet, and Dominic agreed without comment in a way that she appreciated. No interpretation offered, no question about what it meant. Just, yes, lunch works. The same place? She said no, and picked a cafe near her office, brightly lit and crowded and entirely unpretentious. And he arrived exactly on time in a coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and sat across from her at a small table surrounded by people on their lunch breaks eating sandwiches, and he looked completely untroubled by the incongruity. She liked that about him. She was building a list of things she liked about him, which she kept separate, carefully, from a list of things she was still unsure about, which was longer. It was at that third lunch that she told him about James. Not the wedding version. Everyone knew the wedding version, but the 4-year version. The slow accumulation of small erosions that she had talked herself out of noticing. The first time he said something about my weight, "We'd been together about 6 months," she said. She was looking at her coffee. "We were getting ready to go to a party, and I was wearing this dress. I love this dress, dark green. I'd had it for years." And he said, "Are you sure that's the one you want to wear?" And I said yes. And he said, "You might be more comfortable in something with more structure." "More structure," Dominic said. "Right?" She looked up, which is not a compliment disguised as a recommendation. That's a correction disguised as concern. But I told myself he was being practical, because James presented everything as practical. That was how he operated. He never said anything unkind, technically. Everything was framed as a suggestion, a concern, a practical observation. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Over 4 years, that framing becomes the air you breathe. You start making his observations yourself, preemptively, before he has to. You start looking at yourself through his eyes because it's become more familiar than your own. Dominic said nothing. He was watching her with that quality of attention she'd come to expect from him. Total and quiet, and without the discomfort that made most people insert words into silences they can't tolerate. By year 3, she said, I was the one saying I know I should work on my weight, and I know I should be better about the gym, and he would nod in this way, like he was being patient, like this was an ongoing project he was kindly overseeing. She paused. I thought that was love. I thought the fact that he was still there, still with me despite what he'd convinced me was a significant flaw, meant he loved me. It took me until the altar to understand that it was the opposite, that he'd spent 4 years constructing a version of me that was dependent on his tolerance, so that his being there felt like a gift instead of the basic minimum. She stopped. She felt exposed, having said all of this, more exposed than she'd felt standing at the altar, almost because that had been involuntary. This she had chosen to say. Dominic leaned forward slightly. The dress, he said. The dark green one. She blinked. What about it? Do you still have it? Ah, yes. I think so. Somewhere. Good, he said. You should wear it. Emily looked at him for a moment. It was such a small, specific thing to say, and it landed somewhere she hadn't expected, somewhere quiet and internal. She looked back at her coffee. "I'm working through some things," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever we're doing, I'm not in a place where I have it all figured out. I have days where I'm fine and days where I look in the mirror and I hear his voice and I can't." She stopped. "I don't want to pretend I'm further along than I am." "I don't want you to pretend anything," Dominic said. "That might be the most radical sentence anyone has said to me in years," she said, and meant it. "Then you've been around the wrong people," he said. She exhaled. "I've been around people who meant well and made me smaller," she said. "Which is almost worse than the people who don't mean well, because at least with the latter you can be angry." "You can be angry with James," he said. "I am," she said. "I'm furious with him. I'm also still embarrassed, which I hate, because the embarrassment means some part of me is still measuring myself against his standard, and that part of me is an idiot. Or a human being who's been conditioned over 4 years to defer to a standard that was always wrong," Dominic said. "Not an idiot. A person working their way out of system they were inside." Emily set her coffee down and looked at him with a direct, assessing gaze she'd been developing over the past few weeks. The one she used when she was trying to figure out what was real about him. "You're good at this," she said. "At what?" "At saying the thing that reframes something without sounding like a self-help book." Something moved in his expression. "I spent years managing people who could not afford to have their thinking distorted by bad framing," he said. "In my line of work, how you understand a situation determines whether you survive it. I learned to pay attention to language." He paused. "It has applications beyond criminal enterprise." She laughed. A real one, this time, the kind that came from the belly, the kind she hadn't done in weeks, and it was startled out of her by the complete deadpan sincerity with which he'd said criminal enterprise. He watched her laugh with something on his face that she was only just starting to be able to read, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. "You're funny," she said, surprised. "I have my moments," he said. The city moved around them. Lunchtime crowd at the cafe, conversations and espresso machines, and the clatter of plates being cleared. Normal life, proceeding at its normal pace, indifferent to the fact that at this small table, something was beginning. Emily felt it. She wasn't ready to name it, but she felt it. What she didn't feel, sitting across from Dominic Russo, was what she'd felt for years with James, that low-grade requirement to be smaller, to be less, to apologize for taking up space. Dominic moved through space with such complete lack of apology for his own dimensions that it seemed to give permission, not explicitly, not as a speech or a gesture, but just as an atmospheric fact, to exist in one's own body without ongoing negotiation. She was terrified of how much she needed that. She was terrified of the speed at which she was beginning to need it. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course." "I'm scared," she said. "Of this. Not of you specifically, well, a little of you, but not in the way you might think. I'm scared because I've just come out of 4 years with someone who spent that time quietly convincing me I wasn't enough, and I'm now sitting across from someone who says all the things that sound like the opposite of that, and I don't trust my own judgment right now. I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, or if I'm just desperately wanting to hear someone say these things, and I'm projecting them onto whoever is in front of me." "That's a very honest thing to say," Dominic said. "I told you I wanted honesty," she said. "That applies to myself as well." He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "that the appropriate response to that is to slow down. Not to stop, but to move at a pace where you can check your own perception against what's actually happening. Ask me hard questions. Call me out when something doesn't sit right. Don't let me frame things for you. Check the frame. And if I do that," she said, "and I find you're not what you seem, then you'll know that," he said, "and you'll make the right decision. And if I do that and find you are," she said. He held her gaze. "Then we'll both know something important." She nodded slowly. Outside, through the cafe window, the February city moved and hummed. Somewhere across town, she knew, people who had been at the wedding were talking about her. She'd already fielded 3 calls from distant relatives, and twice had walked into a silence at work that could only have been about her. The story was in circulation now, which meant the version of her that existed in other people's minds had become public property, passed around and amended, and used to make points about love and body image and the audacity of men. She couldn't control that. She'd stopped trying to control it around day 4. What she could control was this table, this conversation, this careful and deliberate process of deciding what she actually thought and felt independent of the noise. "I want to ask you something personal," she said, "and I need you to answer without thinking about how it'll come across." "All right," he said. "Do you actually find me attractive?" she said. "And I mean, I need you to not do the thing where you emphasize my inner qualities or my strength or my character, because I've had that speech from well-meaning people, and it always ends up making me feel like my appearance is the problem everyone's politely not discussing. I'm asking directly, in a physical, basic, uncomplicated sense. Do you find me attractive?" Dominic looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "I do. No caveats. None. No, but what really matters is—" "No," he said. "You asked a direct question. The answer is yes." She nodded. She breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They finished lunch. He paid before she could make a case for splitting it, which she objected to, and he overrode with such efficient calm that she decided the battle wasn't worth the energy. Outside on the pavement, they stood for a moment in the cold, and she realized that this was becoming a pattern. These goodbyes that stretched a little, neither of them quite willing to be the first one to end it. "Same time next week?" she said. "Or before," he said. "If you want." She looked at him. "Are you always this available?" "I'm not always this motivated," he said. She pulled her coat closed and told herself this was not the moment for something irresponsible, like smiling too much. "I'll text you," she said. She texted him that evening. By the 4th week, they'd seen each other 6 times. By the 5th, 8. The Enzo restaurant became a regular. Enzo himself had apparently been briefed, because he appeared one evening and took Emily's hands in both of his and said, with complete sincerity, that she was the first person Dominic had ever brought here who looked like she was actually enjoying the food, and Emily laughed and Dominic looked briefly embarrassed, which was wonderful. She wore the dark green dress on the 7th date. She didn't mention why. He noticed and said only, "That color suits you," and she carried the small, bright weight of it with her all evening. She understood with a kind of quiet inevitability, falling for him. She was also, in the same weeks, beginning to move differently. It wasn't a dramatic change. She didn't wake up one morning transformed, didn't have a montage moment in a mirror. It was subtler than that, and more real. It was the accumulation of weeks of being in a room with someone who did not look at her body as a problem to be managed, and the corresponding, gradual loosening of a posture she'd held for years without knowing it was a posture. She stood up straighter. She took up her full space at tables, and in rooms, and in conversations. She ordered what she actually wanted at restaurants, instead of the thing that felt least exposing. She caught herself, once, in a mirror at the office, and thought, "That's me," and then, more quietly, "That's enough." It was the beginning of something she would later understand as her own, and it had been unlocked not by being told to love herself. She'd been told that many times, and it had never worked, but by the simple, radical experience of being around someone who already did. She was careful with it. She was protecting it, the way you protect something still new, still fragile, until it grows its own roots. She was also waiting for something to go wrong. It always went wrong. The town found out before Emily was ready for the town to find out. She told Carla everything. Carla had cornered her at her apartment 2 weeks in with a bottle of wine and an expression that said, "I am your best friend, and I deserve information," and Emily had told her everything, beginning to end, and Carla had listened in absolute silence, which was unusual for Carla, who typically had running commentary on all proceedings. When Emily finished, Carla had said, "Okay, real question, not judging, just asking. Is this because he's the opposite of James in every possible way, and your nervous system is confusing safe with the inverse of the last disaster?" "I've asked myself that," Emily said. And I think it's a factor," Emily said. "But it's not the whole thing. Carla, he's different. Not just from James. For most people." Carla had held her wine glass and studied her. "He's in the Mafia," she said. "Affiliated," Emily said. "Emily, I know. Emily said. He's a criminal, Carla said. Like an actual, not metaphorical criminal. I know, Emily said again. I'm not ignoring that. I'm not pretending it's nothing. It's something. It's a significant something. But Carla, I sat across from this man for 3 hours and I talked about everything, and he just listened and answered and didn't manage me. He didn't filter himself or manage my reactions. He was just there and real, and when I asked him things, he told me the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Carla had looked at her for a long time. Okay, she said finally. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to say, be careful. Not because he seems dangerous to you, though he might be, but because you just had your heart blown up in front of 200 people and you're rebuilding. And rebuilding is when you're most susceptible to things that feel like solid ground. I know, Emily said. You keep saying I know, and I keep worrying that you know it intellectually but not yet in your body, Carla said. Maybe, Emily allowed, but I'm paying attention. I'm checking myself. Carla had nodded and poured more wine and said, then I'm reserving judgment. But I'm going to need to meet him. The Carla meeting happened at week 5 at the Enzo restaurant, and it was approximately what Emily had expected. Carla arrived 30 minutes early to inspect the space, sat across from Dominic with the specific energy of a woman conducting a job interview, and asked him 23 questions in the first hour by Emily's count, including, what exactly do you mean by affiliated? Do you carry a weapon? Have you ever physically harmed anyone? And what are your intentions toward my best friend? Specifically, Dominic answered all of them. Not evasively, actually answered them. He said, it means I operate within an organization that has historical ties to organized crime, but my personal activities over the past decade have been predominantly legitimate, though not entirely. He said, I'm licensed to carry a firearm, yes, though I rarely do in personal contexts. He said, I have in the past, yes, in situations that I make no apologies for and won't detail here, but that I don't consider casual. And he said, to Carla's last question, slowly and without looking away from her, I intend to be honest with her, to not make her smaller, and to earn whatever she decides to give me, which I understand is something I have to demonstrate over time rather than assert. Carla had looked at him for a long moment, and then looked at Emily and said, he's either exactly what he seems or the best operator I've ever encountered. I'm aware of both possibilities, Emily said. Good. Carla picked up her menu. I'm getting the pasta. But it was the 6th week when things got complicated, and the complication came from outside, from the specific, suffocating intimacy of small city where everyone knows someone who knows someone, and word travels along social networks with the speed and accuracy of a well-tuned telegraph. It started with an article, not a major publication, a local blog, the kind that covered society events and restaurant openings and the general social weather of the city's upper tier. The headline was, Jilted Bride and the Mafia Boss. Love story or cautionary tale? Emily found it via a Google alert she'd set up for her own name after the wedding. A paranoid reflex that she'd expected to stop being useful after 2 weeks, and that had, apparently, decided to pay off now. She read it standing at her kitchen counter at 7 in the morning with her coffee getting cold and something tight and unpleasant building in her chest. The article didn't get anything factually wrong, which almost made it worse. It described the wedding, quoted unnamed guests, referenced Dominic's name and his associations, described Emily as the plus-size project manager who was left at the altar, and posed its central question. Is she in danger? Is this a rebound? Is the mafia boss using her? With the tone of genuine concern that was actually prurient fascination in a polite coat. She called Dominic. I've seen it, he said, before she could explain why she was calling. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated that we'd become visible sooner. Are you used to this? She asked. To people writing about you? Less than you might think, he said. I've kept a low profile by design. This is new for me, being written about in connection with someone else. New, she said. Is that good new or bad new? Neither, he said. It's just new. What I want to know is how you are. She thought about it. She looked at her coffee, gone cold on the counter. I'm annoyed, she said. They call me plus-size project manager. Like my job is just contextual information, and my size is my identity. They were reductive, he said. as people often are when they can't think of a more interesting way to describe someone. She paused. I'm not scared of the coverage, exactly, but I'm aware that it changes things. People have opinions about you, and those opinions are going to attach to me now. People I work with, people I know, my extended family are going to read this and call my mother, who is going to call you with concerns, he said. She already did, Emily said. 40 minutes ago. She's my mother. She's worried. She's asking whether I've thought this through and whether I know what I'm getting into, and she's not wrong to ask. No, he said. She's not. I told her I was being careful, Emily said. Which is true. Which I think you know is true. I do, he said. But careful doesn't mean unaffected, she said. And this, she looked at the article still open on her phone screen. This is the beginning of something, isn't it? This is the beginning of people having a lot of opinions about my choices in my life, and I need to decide whether I can live with that. You do, he said. Yes. She appreciated that he didn't soften it. She appreciated that he didn't say it'll blow over or people will find something else to talk about. He just confirmed what they both knew, which was that this was the question, and it was hers to answer. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Do you care? About what they're saying. A pause. About what they're saying about me, no? I've built a life that is largely indifferent to external opinion when external opinion is wrong or irrelevant. Another pause. About what they're saying about you, yes. That I care about. Because it's unfair, she said. Because it reduces you, he said. And you've spent enough time being reduced. She was quiet for a moment. Outside her kitchen window, the city was waking up. Early commuters, dog walkers, the building super taking out recycling with the specific weary efficiency of a man who had done this task 10,000 times. Ordinary life, ongoing. I want to see you tonight, she said. Not at the restaurant. I want to cook. I want to be somewhere that isn't curated. I want to just... She stopped. I want to just be somewhere normal with you and see if it still works. A beat. What's the address? He said. He brought wine. She cooked pasta, not expertly, not Enzo's standard, but genuinely and with effort, because she'd always found cooking meditative, and this evening she needed the grounding work of it, the chopping and stirring and the steam for the pot. She put music on. She set the table in her small dining room, which fit exactly 4 people if they were friendly about it. Dominic arrived in a dark jacket and no tie and stood in her doorway with the wine and looked around her apartment. The bookshelves that covered 2 full walls, the drafting prints from the architectural firm she'd framed and hung in the hallway, the potted plants on every available surface, the good chaos of a space that was entirely and completely hers, with an expression she couldn't read. What? She said. Nothing, he said. It just looks like someone who knows who their lives here. She took the wine. I know who I am most of the time, she said. Some days I'm still figuring it out. That's what I said, he pointed out. She put the wine on the counter and stirred the sauce and let him sit at her kitchen table and ask about the drafting prints. And she told him about the projects, buildings she'd helped coordinate from foundation to completion, the years-long complexity of them, the 100 simultaneous moving parts. And he listened with his full attention and asked questions that suggested he actually understood what she was telling him. He had, she knew by now, a different kind of intelligence than she'd expected. Not academic, not credentialed, but comprehensive and structural, the kind that comes from managing real complexity in the real world under actual pressure. They ate at the small table with the good wine and too much pasta and talked for 2 hours, and at no point did the article or the coverage or anyone else's opinions enter the room. The room was just theirs. When he left, late, because neither of them had made a move to end the evening, he stood at her doorway and said, quietly, "Thank you for this." "For pasta," she said. "For trust," he said. "For showing me this place. It matters." She leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. "Dominic," she said, and his name felt different in her mouth now than it had in the garden, in the church, in the first careful weeks of this. It felt now like something she had a right to. "Yes," he said. "I want to be with you," she said. "I'm not fully sure what that means yet, or at what pace, or what all it involves. But I want you to know that I want it. So you're not guessing." He looked at her steadily. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, not performatively, but genuinely in the way things shift when they matter. "I'm not guessing," he said. "I haven't been." She nodded. "Good night, then," she said. "Good night, Emily," he said. She closed the door and stood in her hallway and pressed her back against it and thought, "This is real. Whatever it is, it's real." She thought that was enough to build on. She thought, be careful, be honest, keep going. She went to sleep that night without the grinding weight in her chest, and for the first time since the wedding, slept through until morning. We are halfway through this beautiful, breathtaking journey, and we have to stop for just a moment to check in with you, because your presence here matters to us deeply. Now here is a question for the comments while you catch your breath. What do you think of Dominic so far? Is he everything you hoped for? Or are you still watching him carefully the way Emily is? And be honest, did you tear up at any point yet? Because there is absolutely no shame in it. Tell us everything below. We are here, we are listening, and we love you for being here. The town did not stop talking. This, Emily would come to understand, was simply the nature of being a story that people felt entitled to. She had become, without her consent, a kind of public narrative, the jilted woman, the unlikely romance, the Mafia angle that made it lurid enough to share. Opinions arrived in waves. The people who thought she was brave, the people who thought she was reckless, the people who thought the whole situation was romantic, and the people who thought she was setting feminism back by moving from one man's definition of her worth to another's. She received messages from strangers on social media. She received concerned calls from relatives who had followed the story via the small but growing ecosystem of coverage it had generated. She received, once, an anonymous note slipped under her office door that said, "He will hurt you. Get out." She had no way of knowing who had sent it or whether it was based on anything, and she spent an entire day sick with the uncertainty before deciding that anonymous fear-mongering from an unknown source was not actionable information. She told Dominic about the note. "Do you want to find out who sent it?" he said. "No," she said immediately. "That's no. I don't want that." "All right," he said. No argument, no pushback. "I want you to tell me if there's something I should know," she said. "About your world. About what being around you means in terms of risk. I need accurate information. There is always some level of ambient risk associated with my name," he said carefully. "I won't pretend otherwise. My associations mean that I have people in my orbit who have enemies, and those enemies sometimes extend their reach broadly. However," he met her eyes, "I have also spent the last decade carefully insulating my personal life from the operational elements. People in my organization understand that my personal relationships are out of bounds. I have enforced that clearly and consistently." "Enforced," she said. "How?" "The way things get enforced in my world," he said, firmly, "with consequences." She absorbed this. She had been doing a lot of absorbing over these weeks, a lot of sitting with information that didn't fit comfortably anywhere in her prior experience, and waiting for her own judgment to tell her what to do with it. "I'm not naive," she said. "I don't want you to think I am. I know what your world is. I know it's not clean, and I know there are things you've done and things you continue to oversee that I can't defend. I'm not trying to make that into something it isn't." "I know," he said, "but I'm also not going to let fear of a version of you that might exist override what I've actually seen," she said. "Because that would be letting other people's narrative about you replace my own direct experience, and I've done that before. I spent 4 years letting James's narrative about me replace my own, and I'm not doing it again." In any direction. Dominic was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous but rigorous way to approach it," he said. "It's the only way I know," she said. The public scrutiny peaked in week 8, when a columnist for a wider circulation publication picked up the story and wrote a piece that was ostensibly about body image and public shaming and the wedding rejection, but which used Emily's name and Dominic's name throughout and contained a line that made Emily's stomach turn. One can only wonder what the plus-size bride sees in the dangerous man who stepped forward. Protection? Revenge? A rebound that conveniently comes with security. She read it on her lunch break and sat with the sick feeling for exactly 10 minutes. Then she texted Carla, who responded with a string of incoherent profanity that actually made her feel better. Then she texted Dominic. "Have you seen the column?" He responded, "Yes." "Are you all right?" She typed back, "No, but I will be." And then she did something she hadn't planned. She opened her own social media. She kept it mostly quiet since the wedding, unwilling to perform either suffering or recovery for an audience. And she wrote a post. Not long, not elaborate. To everyone who has been following this story, I'm fine. More than fine, actually. I spent a long time measuring my worth by a standard that was never mine, and I'm done with that. I don't owe anyone an explanation of my choices, but I will say this. The man who stepped forward in that church has shown me more genuine respect in 2 months than I received in 4 years with someone who claimed to love me. Draw your own conclusions. I've drawn mine. She posted it before she could second-guess it, and then put her phone in her bag and went back to work. By evening, the post had been shared 11,000 times. The comments split along entirely predictable fault lines, and she didn't read them. She had the foresight to turn off notifications, but Carla texted her screenshots of the ones that mattered, and some of them, from women she'd never met, saying things like, "I've been standing at my own altar for years, and I needed to read this today," made her cry a little on the bus home. Good tears this time. Rare ones. Dominic called that night. "Your post," he said. "Yes," she said. "That was brave. It was honest," she said, which sometimes looks like the same thing. "I want to do something," he said. "Publicly. I'm not interested in performances, but I'm aware that the current public narrative about you is written largely without your input, and I'd like to contribute something more accurate." "Such as?" she said. "Come with me to an event," he said. "Next weekend. A legitimate one. A charity auction I'm involved in for a children's hospital. It's public. It'll be photographed, and I would like people to see us the way we actually are rather than the way they've been imagining us." Emily thought about this. She thought about what it meant to walk into a room with Dominic Russo and have photographs taken and have those photographs circulate and have her face become part of yet another cycle of public commentary. She also thought about what it meant to keep hiding, to keep letting other people's stories about her go unanswered. She'd done that for 4 years in a different context, and she knew exactly where it led. "What do I wear?" she said. He paused, as if the answer had come faster than he expected. "Whatever you want," he said. "Whatever makes you feel like yourself." "That's either very wise or very useless," she said. "Both," he agreed. The event was at a hotel ballroom, and Emily arrived in a wine-red dress she had bought specifically for this occasion. Not because she needed armor, but because she had finally, after weeks of the slow internal work, reached a point where dressing was an act of pleasure rather than a negotiation with her own reflection. The dress was not forgiving or strategic or chosen to minimize anything. It was just a beautiful dress that she liked, that fit her body as it was, that she had paid too much for and considered worth every cent. Dominic was waiting in the lobby. He looked at her the way she had, by now, learned to receive, directly, unhurried, without the complicated social math of a look that's trying to say something other than what it is. "You look extraordinary," he said. "I know," she said, and meant it, and the fact that she meant it was its own small revolution. They entered the ballroom together, and the room noticed. She felt it, the precise calibration of attention shifting, the conversations that briefly paused and then resumed, the phone cameras not quite concealed. She kept her chin level and her hand easy in the crook of his arm, and she thought, "This is just a room. These are just people. I have managed complex multi-year projects with dozens of stakeholders and impossible timelines. I can walk through a ballroom." Dominic moved through the room with his customary absolute ease, greeting people, many of whom she could see making rapid recalibrations about how to behave in his presence, and introducing her simply, without preamble, "Emily Carter." Not "my friend Emily" or "someone I've been seeing," just her name, presented as though her name was sufficient context, which she thought it should be. The auction proceeded. Dominic bid on several items with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything, and Emily sat beside him and ate and talked to the people on her other side, a cardiologist and her husband a civil engineer, and was, she realized partway through the evening, having a genuinely good time. Not performing having a good time, actually having it. The photographs were taken. She saw some of them the next day, she and Dominic at the table, at the auction podium, leaving the hotel. In none of them did she look like a woman trying to take up less space. She looked like a woman who had decided her space was hers. The coverage that followed was different from the previous coverage. The column that had sneered was suddenly quiet. The social media commentary shifted, not universally, but noticeably, toward something more genuinely interested and less prurient. A stylist wrote about the dress. A journalist who covered social dynamics wrote thoughtfully about what Emily's story represented. And in the comments of one of the articles, buried halfway down in hundreds of responses, someone wrote, "She looks happy." Like actually happy, not performing it. That's rare. Emily read that one. She read it 3 times. She thought. She actually was. The morning James called, Emily was in the middle of a conference call with 3 architects and a contractor about a steel delivery that had been delayed by 2 weeks and was threatening to push back the entire Phase 2 timeline. She saw his name come up on her phone screen during the call and felt a complicated jolt run through her. Not longing, not fear exactly, but the specific discomfort of something you thought was resolved demanding to be reopened. She let go to voicemail. The voicemail was 43 seconds long. She knew this because she stared at the little timer for a full minute before pressing play. His voice on the recording was careful and tight and trying to sound casual, which was its own tell. James's default was casual, and when he tried to sound it, he always overshot. "Emily, it's James. I know this is unexpected. I wanted to reach out. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I feel like I owe you a conversation at least. A real one, not a text. I've heard things have been, look, I just like to talk. Call me back if you're open to it. And I'm sorry. For what it's worth. I'm sorry." She listened to it twice. Then she put the phone down and finished the conference call because the steel delivery had not been delayed because of James, and it was not going to be resolved by her being distracted. After the call, she sat at her desk and thought about what she felt. She'd been preparing for this, or something like it. In the abstract, the way you prepare for a weather event you know is coming but can't precisely schedule. She hadn't expected to feel so clear. She'd expected the old undertow, the reflexive pull of 4 years and a shared history, the complicated gravity of someone who had once meant everything. What she felt instead was something more like curiosity tinged with caution and a firm awareness of my own preferences. She called Dominic. "James called," she said. A pause. "What did he say?" "That he's sorry and he wants to talk." She paused. "I'm not going to call him back today. But I think when I'm ready, I think I want to see him. Not to reconcile, not to leave a door open, but because I have things I want to say, and I want to say them with clarity rather than in a state of crisis. And I think I'm close to being ready." "What do you need from me in relation to that?" Dominic asked. She appreciated the question more than almost anything. "Not. Are you sure or not? You don't owe him anything, not the kind of guidance that takes someone else's decision as its own. Just what do you need?" "I need you to know about it," she said, "and to not manage it. It's mine to handle." "I know that," he said. "And if I decide I want to see him," she said, "I need you to not do anything." A beat. Define anything. "I need you to not make it a confrontation," she said. "Not involve yourself in a way that takes it out of my hands." Another beat. This one longer. "That's a fair request," he said finally, "and I'll honor it. But I'll also be honest with you. My instinct is very much in the other direction." "I know," she said. "I'm asking you to override the instinct." "I will," he said. She believed him. 2 weeks later, she met James at a coffee shop near the apartment they'd once shared, which she'd chosen because it was public and because the familiarity of the neighborhood gave her a home field clarity she wanted. She arrived first and sat facing the door, and when James walked in, she watched him cross the room and registered, with a kind of detached observation, that he looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, he was the same man, same height, same groomed hair, but something in him had contracted. He sat across from her. He opened with, "You look good." "Thank you," she said, neutrally, because she did, and she wasn't going to perform false modesty or awkward deflection, and she also wasn't going to thank him for noticing. "I mean it," he said. "You look different. Happy, maybe. I don't know." "I am," she said. He folded his hands on the table. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed this several times and was finding that none of the rehearsals quite applied. I want to apologize, he said, for what I said at the wedding, for the way I said it. It was cruel and it was public, and he exhaled. There's no version of it that was okay. No, Emily agreed. There isn't. I was scared, he said. That's not an excuse. It's just, I panicked. I've been having doubts, and I panicked, and I did it the worst possible way. James, she said, what did you actually want from this conversation? He blinked. Because if it's absolution, she said, I don't have it to give, and I wouldn't give it on this timeline even if I did. If it's information about whether I'm okay, whether you did lasting damage, I'm going to tell you that I'm fine, which is true, and that you did do damage, which is also true, and I'm not going to perform either one more or less than it is for your comfort. She looked at him steadily. If it's something else, if you're here because you've heard about Dominic and something in you is reacting to that, then I want you to know that what I'm doing with my life is mine and not a referendum on you. James was quiet for a moment. Then, is it serious? With him? Yes, she said. James stopped. He looked like he was weighing something. I've heard things about him, Emily, about who he is, what he's involved in. I know who he is, she said. Does your family? My family, she said, has met him and has formed their own views, which I trust them to hold. She looked at James. I notice you're asking about Dominic rather than engaging with what I said about the damage. That's useful information. He had the grace to look ashamed. I'm not doing this right, he said. No, she agreed. But I'll say this. I accept that you're sorry. Not in the way that makes it resolved or clean or closed. But I accept that you probably are. She paused. What I won't do is let that apology reopen something I've already been through the process of putting down. You made me believe for 4 years that my body was something I needed to apologize for. That was the damage. Not just the wedding. The wedding was just the end of it, the point at which you finally said out loud what you'd been communicating quietly for years. James looked at the table. I didn't mean... You meant something, she said. It may not have been as deliberate as it felt on the receiving end, but you meant something. She picked up her coffee. I want you to hear this clearly, because I think you need to. The thing you rejected me for is not a flaw. It was never a flaw. You spent 4 years convincing me it was, and it took me a while to understand that the fault in the equation was never my body. It was your capacity to value a person beyond what they look like. James was very still. He looked, she thought, like a man receiving information he'd been running from. I know, he said finally, very quietly. I know that now. Good, she said. Then this was a useful conversation. She finished her coffee. She stood up and put on her coat and looked at him one last time. This man she had loved, this man who had let her down in a way that had rewritten her understanding of herself. This man who looked smaller than she remembered, and she felt not anger and not longing and not the complicated mixture of both that she'd been bracing for. She felt primarily finished. Take care of yourself, James, she said. She walked out of the coffee shop. She walked down the familiar street of the neighborhood she'd once shared with him, and the city moved around her, and she felt the pavement solidly under her feet, and she thought, I said what I needed to say. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't small. I was honest. She texted Dominic. Done? Fine. Actually fine. He responded in 30 seconds. I know you are. She was almost at the subway when she heard her name. Not James's voice, someone else's, a woman she recognized from the wedding, a friend of James's family named Victoria, who had apparently been having coffee at the shop on the corner. Emily, Victoria said, in the uncertain tone of a woman who wasn't sure which version of events she was looking at. I thought that was you. I just saw James go in. I didn't realize. We had coffee, Emily said. Brief. It's fine. She smiled. A real one, she was surprised to find. How are you, Victoria? Victoria blinked. I'm fine. You seem really well. I am, Emily said. Really? She meant it. She continued down the street and took the subway home and sat in her apartment in the afternoon light and felt, for the first time, like the weight she'd been carrying had been properly set down. Not dropped, not thrown, not abandoned in the road like James's boutonniere. Set down, deliberately, in a place she had chosen. That evening, Dominic came over. He didn't ask for a debrief. He brought food, not elaborately, just good sandwiches from a place she'd mentioned once that he'd apparently filed away. And they sat at her kitchen table and ate, and she told him what she'd said to James, not all of it, but the shape of it, and he listened. "Are you relieved?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And something else. I don't know the word for it." "Complete?" he offered. She thought about it. "Maybe," she said. "Or just free, like a process that needed to finish is finished." He nodded. They ate. The kitchen was warm, and the evening light came through the window at the angle she liked, and Dominic Russo, complicated, surprising, infuriatingly still, sat at her table and didn't need to fill the silence, and Emily thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not the drama of it, not the grand gesture in the church. This, the ordinary good weight of being with someone who doesn't ask you to be less. "I love you," she said. It came out before she'd fully decided to say it. Or maybe she had fully decided, and the decision had simply been ready before she knew it was. Either way, it was out in the room now, present and unretractable, and she didn't particularly want to retract it. Dominic set down his sandwich. He looked at her with an expression that was, she realized, the most open she'd ever seen on him. All the customary composure still there, but something underneath it visible, something that had been patient for a long time and was now given permission to surface. "I love you, Emily," he said. She breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They finished their sandwiches. Later, she would remember this as the best evening of the whole unlikely sequence of them. Not the grand events, not the hotel ballroom or the church garden or the candlelit dinners. Just the sandwiches and the light and the specific piece of two people who had both, by difficult routes, arrived at something true. The confrontation between Dominic and James happened 10 days later, and it was not, as Emily had feared it might be, anything involving power or intimidation or the darker resources of Dominic's particular world. It happened at a mutual acquaintance's birthday party that James attended without knowing Dominic would be there, and that Dominic attended at Emily's side because they had been invited weeks before the James situation had resolved itself. Emily saw James first, across the room, drink in hand, doing a slow scan of the party that ended on her face, and then moved immediately to Dominic beside her. She felt Dominic's presence at her shoulder become, incrementally, more deliberate. "He's here," she said quietly. "I see him," Dominic said, just as quietly. "I'm going to say hello," she said. "And you're going to come with me, but only if you can do it without making it into something." "I can," he said. They crossed the room. James looked like a man who had been given a situation he would have chosen to avoid and was attempting, with partial success, to manage his own face. "James," Emily said. "Good to see you." Clean and direct. James looked at Dominic. "You must be Dominic Russo," Dominic said, and offered his hand. James shook it. There was, Emily noticed, no performance of dominance from Dominic. No grip designed to establish hierarchy, no posture that announced itself. Just a hand offered and accepted. She thought, this is what genuine confidence looks like. It doesn't need to prove. "I've heard a lot about you," James said, which was the specific kind of thing people say when they've heard things they can't name in polite company. "I imagine," Dominic said. "And you were with Emily for 4 years, so I know something of you as well." A pause. "I know, specifically, that she spent months doing the work of dismantling things you spent 4 years building into her. And I know that she did it without bitterness, which says more about her than it does about you." He said it without heat, without volume, without the flexed muscle energy of a threat. He said it the way he said everything, as a matter of accurate reporting. James said nothing for a moment. He looked at Emily, who offered nothing back. She was watching him the way you watch something at a distance that no longer has the power to reach you. "I told her I was sorry," James said. He was speaking to Dominic, but his eyes kept going to Emily. "I meant it." "I know you did," Dominic said. "And I'm not here to have an argument about it. I'm here because Emily is here, and I go where she goes. That's all." There was a silence that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, which at a party, surrounded by noise and music, was actually quite long. Then James said, to Emily specifically, he stopped. He shook his head slightly. "He's different from what I expected. Most things are," Emily said, "when you pay attention instead of assuming." James gave a small, slightly rueful nod. He excused himself. He crossed to the other side of the room, and Emily watched him go and then turned back to Dominic. "You were perfect," she said. "I was honest," he said, "which is the same thing for me." She took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands for a moment with an expression she'd come to love, that particular quality of contained pleasure, the equivalent in someone of Dominic's composure to what in another person would have been a broad smile. The party continued. They drank and talked, and at some point ended up in a corner with the birthday host and his wife and a documentary filmmaker who had heard enough of their story to be fascinated by it, and the four of them talked for an hour about unlikely beginnings and the social physics of who people are allowed to love, and Emily found herself saying things she hadn't previously articulated, things about how the wedding humiliation had, paradoxically, forced a clarity she might never have found otherwise. How being reduced to her body in front of everyone she knew had made her, eventually, understand that her body was not a problem to be solved. How that understanding had taken time and was ongoing and was not a destination she had arrived at, but a territory she was learning to inhabit. The documentary filmmaker asked if she'd ever consider telling the story publicly. Emily said she'd think about it. She meant it. On the way home, in the car, she leaned against Dominic's shoulder, a new thing. She was allowing herself new things, and looked at the city moving past the windows. "What are you thinking?" he said. "About the future," she said. "What that looks like. In the practical sense." She paused. "We haven't talked about it." "No," he said. "We've been in the present, mostly." "I think we're ready to be in the future," she said. "At least the near one." She felt him breathe. "What does that mean to you?" "The near future." "It means continuing," she said, more deliberately, less as two separate people who happen to spend a lot of time together, and more as, she searched for the word. "As," he said. "As a unit," she said. "A genuine one, where we think about things together instead of in parallel." "I want that," he said. "I know," she said, "but I want us to say it, not assume it. I'm done with assuming things are understood when they haven't been said." He turned slightly toward her. "Then I'll say it. I want to build something with you. Not just see you, build with you, specifically and intentionally. I want to be the person you think about when you're planning anything, the way I find myself thinking about you in every decision I make now." He paused. "I've been doing that for a while. I just wasn't sure it was my place to say it until you were ready." She looked at him. "I'm ready," she said. He nodded. The city moved past. "There's something I should tell you," he said, and his voice took on a quality that made her straighten slightly. "Something I've been deciding when to say." "Tell me," she said. "The organization," he said carefully. "My formal affiliation. I've been in the process for the past 18 months before I met you, of a deliberate extraction. It's not simple, and it's not complete, and there are elements that will take time. But I'm getting out." He met her eyes. "I wanted you to know that. Not because I'm doing it for you. I was in the process before the church, before any of this. But because the timeline is relevant to you now, and you deserve to know where I actually am." Emily absorbed this. "How long?" she said. "At my current pace, the remaining legitimate extraction, the restructuring of the businesses, the formalization of the separations, another 18 months to 2 years. The operational distance, which matters most for safety, is already largely established." "Already largely established," she repeated. "Yes, but not entirely." "No," he said, "not entirely. I won't lie to you about that." She was quiet for a moment. The car moved through the city. She thought about what she knew and what she'd accepted and the list of things she'd been building over months about who this man was. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Does it change anything?" he said. And for the first time, she heard something in his voice that was not quite certainty. "No," she said. "You were honest with me from the beginning about what you were. And you're being honest with me now about where you're going." She looked at him. "That's what I asked for. That's what you've given me." He held her gaze for a moment, and she saw, again, briefly, that visible thing beneath the composure, something that was immense and careful and grateful. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. 3 weeks later, he asked her to marry him. Not in a grand gesture. No public event, no restaurant, no audience. He asked her at her kitchen table, which had become their kitchen table in the way things become shared when two people use them enough, over coffee on a Sunday morning, with the newspaper she read, and his phone he was ignoring for her sake, and the sound of the city starting its day outside the window. He set a ring on the table between them. It was simple, a single stone, nothing theatrical, and he looked at her and said, "I don't want to do anything you're not ready for, but I want you to know that I am. Ready, if you are, or when you are." Emily looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about the church, the garden, the weeks of careful, honest conversation. She thought about the coffee shop in James and the way she'd felt walking out of it. She thought about the evening with the sandwiches and the light, and the first time she'd said she loved him and he'd said it back without rehearsal. She thought about the documentary filmmaker and the things she'd said about learning to inhabit her own territory. "Yes," she said. "Now. I'm ready now." He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it, the stone catching the Sunday morning light, and then at him, and she felt, in the specific center of her chest, something she could only describe as the full, settled, unshowy weight of a right thing. "We should tell my father first," she said. "He already knows I was going to ask," Dominic said. She stared at him. "You asked my father." "I told your father," he said. "There's a distinction. I told him because he's your father and he should know, not because his permission was required." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, the belly kind, the startled kind. "You're unbelievable," she said. "I've been told," he said. She picked up her coffee. The Sunday morning continued. Outside, the city moved and breathed and did not particularly notice that in a kitchen with too many plants and too many books and the drafting prints in the hallway and the good light that came through in the mornings, something had just been decided. Something that had been coming since the moment a bouquet hit the floor in a church and a stranger walked forward from the back of the room. The second wedding was nothing like the first. The first had been 14 months in the making. The venue deposit and the catering contracts and the florist and the rehearsal dinner and the save the dates and the wedding website and the seating chart that Emily had revised 11 times, an enormous machine of logistics and expectation that had hummed along toward its destination and then arrived at a man who wasn't worth any of it. The second was 6 weeks of planning, executed with the specific efficiency of a project manager who had learned, under the worst possible circumstances, that scale does not equal meaning. They held it on a Saturday in late May. The venue was a restored farmhouse outside the city. Old stone walls and wide wooden floors and tall windows that looked out onto a meadow that was in May, green and extravagant and indifferent to occasion in the way that only natural things can be. The guest list was 37 people. Carla was the maid of honor. Emily's father walked her down the aisle, which was a narrow path between 2 rows of wooden chairs, with wildflowers on either side that Emily and Carla had arranged themselves the morning before. There was no seating chart. There were no charger plates. There was very good wine, and a caterer from a small restaurant downtown who made things that tasted like someone had cooked them rather than assembled them. And there was a string quartet that played through the ceremony and then switched to something warmer during dinner. And there were 37 people who loved Emily Carter and had, in their own ways and by their various routes, arrived at a cautious but genuine acceptance of the complicated man she had chosen. Dominic's side was smaller, 8 people, including 2 men whose precise roles in his life Emily understood only in the abstract and who both wore suits that matched their quietly watchful energy, and an older woman named Lucia, who turned out to be his mother, and who took Emily's hands during the pre-ceremony gathering and said, in Italian-accented English that was precise and warm, "He is not easy, but he is worth it. I raised him, and I know both things completely." "So do I," Emily said. Lucia held her hands for a moment longer, looking at her with dark eyes that were very like her son's. "You changed something in him," she said. "I don't know what you did, but something is different. Something opened." Emily thought about what to say. She settled on, "I think he changed something in me first." Lucia smiled, wide, sudden, a smile that rearranged her whole face into something young and delighted. "Good," she said. "That is exactly right. That is what it should be." Emily's mother, across the room, was watching this exchange with an expression of guarded warmth that had been developing over the past 3 months, the period during which she had met Dominic twice, asked him several pointed questions that he had answered with his characteristic directness, and arrived, Emily thought, at the same position her father had occupied from the beginning. She's smarter than everyone in that room combined, and she can make her own decisions. The ceremony was performed by a woman named Judge Patricia Osei, a family friend of the Carters, who conducted it with the quiet gravity of someone who understood that the words she was saying were specific and mattered. Emily walked down the aisle in a dress she had designed herself, or as close to designed as someone who was a project manager and not a designer could get. She had found a dressmaker who specialized in custom work, and she had brought photographs and sketches and very precise language about what she wanted, which was something that felt like her, that moved the way she moved, that she would not look back at in photographs and wish had been different. It was ivory again. She had decided she was not ceding that color to the disaster of the first attempt, with clean lines and a deep neckline and sleeves that fell away at the shoulder and a silhouette that did not apologize for or minimize or restructure her body. Just wore it the way clothes are supposed to. She did not carry white roses. She carried peonies, deep pink, full and lush and entirely themselves. And when she stepped into the aisle and the string quartet began and she saw Dominic at the far end of the path, standing in a gray suit with a white pocket square and his hands still at his sides and that expression of contained, total attention, she thought, there you are. There was no part of her that doubted. That was the part she would return to later when people asked. Not the absence of fear. There was always some fear in any real thing, but the absence of doubt. She had doubted James at every level, from the first moment, and in increasing depth over 4 years, and had explained the doubts away, had buried them under the busy work of loving someone who was slowly making her smaller. She had no such doubt here. Not for Dominic, not about this, not about herself in relation to him. She reached the altar. He looked at her. She said, because the word came before she could think of anything else, and also because it was the right word, the truest one. Just that. I'm here, and you're here. The corner of his mouth moved. He said. Judge Osei smiled and opened her notes. The vows they had written themselves, separately, and they had agreed not to share them in advance. Dominic went first. He stood in front of her and held both her hands and said, I'm not a man who expected this. I spent a long time building a life that was, in many ways, sealed against the possibility of something like this, something I'd have to be genuinely vulnerable to, something that could reach me. And then you walked into a garden in a wedding dress, carrying a humiliation that wasn't yours, and you held it with more dignity than I've seen in most people. And I thought, that person is made of something real. Everything I've learned about you since has confirmed that. A pause. His voice stayed level, but she could see, in the set of his jaw and the dark intensity of his eyes, what it cost him. I promise to tell you the truth. I promise to not manage you or reduce you or allow you to be reduced in my presence. I promise to stand next to you, not in front of you, not behind you, while you build whatever life it is you're building, and to build alongside you with everything I have. I promise to be the version of myself that is actually here in this room with you, not a curated version, not a managed one, just the one that is. He breathed. That's what I have to give, and I give it completely. Emily's throat was tight. She breathed through it. She looked at their joined hands, his hands which she knew now, the scar on the left one, the way they were still unless they were doing something, the way they held things with total care or not at all. She looked up at him. She said, I spent a long time believing that my worth was conditional, that there was a version of me that was acceptable and a version that needed to be worked on, and that love was something I could earn by getting closer to the acceptable version. I don't believe that anymore. You didn't talk me out of it. I worked my way out of it, slowly, over months, and you were there while I did it, and you didn't try to accelerate it or direct it or take credit for it. You just stayed, steady and honest and real. And I want you to know that that is rarer than any of the gestures, rarer than the church or the garden or anything that makes a good story. The staying, while someone else does their own work, that's the thing. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be honest with you in return. I promise to ask hard questions and expect true answers and give them back. I promise to love you in the way that actually means something, not the performed version, not the version that looks good from the outside, but the daily, ordinary, sometimes difficult, real version. I promise to stay, Dominic. Through the complicated parts of who you are and the complicated parts of who I am, I will stay. She held his gaze. That's all I've got. But I mean every word of it. Judge Osei's voice, when she spoke, was slightly thicker than it had been. She proceeded briskly and professionally and arrived at the part that mattered. I do, Dominic said. I do, Emily said. The 37 people in the wooden chairs applauded. Carla was crying openly and not attempting to hide it. Emily's father was not crying, but his jaw was doing the specific thing it did when he was keeping something very large, very tightly contained. Lucia was smiling her wide, face-rearranging smile. The two watchful men from Dominic's side of the guest list were applauding with what appeared to be genuine warmth, which somehow moved Emily more than anything else. Dominic kissed her. The string quartet played. The meadow beyond the tall windows was green and enormous and completely indifferent, going about its business of being a meadow in May, which is one of the best things a meadow can do. They ate dinner and people made toasts. Carla's toast was 12 minutes long and alternated between very funny and requiring everyone to be handed additional napkins. Emily's father's was 3 sentences, each one precise and full, and the third one was, I have never seen my daughter so entirely herself, and I have never been more grateful for anything in my life. Dominic's associate, the larger of the two watchful men, whose name turned out to be Frank, made a toast in a rough, affectionate voice that suggested he had known Dominic for a very long time and had given up on him settling down before recently revising his opinion, and it contained exactly one sentence about criminal enterprise that made the whole table go briefly silent and then erupt, in which Emily had a feeling would become the story they told at every anniversary. She danced with her father. She danced with Carla. She danced with Dominic, who turned out to dance with the same quality he brought to everything. Not showy, not performed, just present and attentive, moving with her rather than directing her. And she thought, yes, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Later, when the evening had softened and the guests were scattered in small groups around the farmhouse and the meadow was dark beyond the windows, Emily found herself standing at one of the tall windows with a glass of champagne, looking out at the night. She felt Dominic come to stand beside her. He didn't speak. They stood there together for a moment, the party continuing behind them, the dark meadow in front. Are you happy? He said. Yes, she said. Are you? Yes, he said, quietly, with complete certainty. Very. She leaned slightly into him. He settled his arm around her. The night outside was still and full of stars, and the meadow was dark and ongoing, and behind them 37 people who loved them were talking and laughing and being alive. She thought about the bouquet hitting the floor. She thought about the ivory runner and the stained glass and 230 people all inhaling at once. She thought about the garden, the stone bench, the magnolia tree, and a stranger who had said both when she'd asked him something hard. She thought about dinners and lunches and a note slipped under an office door and a dark green dress in the back of her closet and sandwiches on a Sunday and a ring on a table in morning light. She thought about James saying too thick in a church full of witnesses and the terrible, clarifying, ultimately liberating fact of it, how it had broken something that needed to be broken, had forced an accounting that she had been deferring, had been the end of one version of her life, and the beginning, improbably and unexpectedly and against all reasonable odds, of this one. She would not thank him for it. She would never thank anyone for humiliating her. But she could acknowledge, standing here with champagne and stars and her husband beside her, that the crack had lead in the light. She turned to look at Dominic. He was looking at her in the way he always looked at her, fully, without dividing his attention, without waiting for his turn. I'm glad you walked into that church, she said. So am I, he said. She took his hand. He held it the way he held things, completely. The party moved on behind them. The meadow breathed in the dark. And Emily Carter, Emily Russo now, though she would spend a long time deciding what to do with names because she had always been herself, and that was not a thing that changed with the ceremony, stood in the light of the farmhouse windows with the man who had, at the moment of her greatest public humiliation, moved toward her instead of away, and thought, this is what love is supposed to feel like. Not the drama, not the grand gesture. The ordinary, extraordinary daily weight of being fully seen. She turned back to the window. She raised her champagne glass slightly, to the meadow, to the night, to no one in particular. She thought, you are worthy of love just as you are. Never let anyone make you feel like you're too much or too little. She had believed it once a long time ago, before 4 years of small erosions. She believed it again now. Not because someone had told her to, she'd been told to many times, and it had never stuck until it was lived. She believed it because she had watched herself stand at an altar after a devastating public humiliation and not fall, and because she had walked away from that altar and asked hard questions and gotten honest answers and done the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding her own sense of herself, and because she had arrived on the other side of that work, here, this room, this man, this meadow, this one life she had, which was hers, entirely, finally, irrevocably hers. And just like that, our story comes to a close, but the conversation, that's just beginning, and we want you to be part of it. If this story moved you, if Emily's journey touched something deep inside your chest, if Dominic made you believe, even just for a moment, that real love still exists in this world, then reach out and give this video a like right now. Go on, press it. That little button carries more love than you know, and every single one means the world to us. Not part of the family yet? Oh, sweetheart, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and come home to us. We put out stories just like this one every single week. Stories that will make you feel, make you think, and remind you that love is always, always worth it. And to our gorgeous returning subscribers, welcome back, beautiful souls. You came back, and that fills our hearts in ways we cannot fully put into words. This community exists because of you, and we are endlessly grateful for every single one of you who keeps showing up. Now here is where it gets fun. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us. Did you see Dominic coming from the very beginning? Or did he surprise you completely? Are you team Emily all the way? Did you cry? And if so, which moment got you first? And the big one, have you ever had a moment in your life that looked like total disaster, that broke you open completely, and turned out to be the most beautiful beginning you never expected? Tell us your story. Every single comment gets read. Every single voice matters here, and we genuinely cannot wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you, truly, from the bottom of our hearts, for staying with us until the very last word. You didn't have to, and you did, and that means everything. We'll see you in the next one, and trust us, it is going to be worth every second of the wait. Until then, take care of your heart. Love yourself the way Emily learned to love herself, and never, not for a single moment, let anyone make you feel like you are anything less than completely, perfectly enough. See you soon.